My name is Amber Reed. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Fort Collins, Colorado, a town big enough to have 3 Starbucks, but small enough that everyone still waves when they drive past your house. People don't really leave Fort Collins unless they're forced to. I left. A long time ago. I don't usually talk about what I do. Not because I don't want to. It's just not the kind of job you talk about with your wine and cheese. There's no elevator pitch. There are no office plans. Most days, my work never makes it past a locked screen and a few encrypted channels. And if I do my job right, no one even knows anything happened at all. So I got good at staying quiet. Not in a shy way. Quiet in the way you learn to be when details can kill. Quiet in the way that allows you to keep listening when people assume you're not in the room. Quiet. Because if you're not the loudest, nobody ever expects much from you. That works for the job. It doesn't work at Thanksgiving dinner. I flew in on a red-eye, last row, middle seat, between a teenager with a head cold and a man who snored through turbulence like it was his profession. As usual, no one met me at the airport. No one ever does. My mother says, "You're so independent, Amber. You don't need a ride." That's how she means it, like a compliment. I stopped arguing years ago. Home still smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Mom's house hasn't changed in 20 years. The living room walls are lined with framed certificates. My sister Jill's law degrees, a picture of my brother Cody at a startup awards dinner, a photo of my parents shaking hands with the mayor at some charity event I barely remember. My name is nowhere. I don't mind. Or I tell myself that. That afternoon, I found myself exactly where I always do, quietly in the kitchen, helping out while everyone else arrived in waves of noise and cologne and complaints about traffic. My sister brought some fancy gluten-free tart. My brother brought himself and a phone that never left his hand. My father, as always, arrived last and said the least. I washed dishes, unpacked groceries, kept the dog from knocking over the wine. Nobody noticed. That's how it usually is. "You still doing that computer thing?" Jill asked later, barely looking up from her phone. I gave the usual vague smile. "Yeah, still doing the thing." "Must be nice not having to explain your job to anyone," she said, with that little edge she gets when she thinks she's being clever. Everyone laughed. Even Mom. I didn't. They don't know what I do. Not really. They think I work in tech. Maybe cybersecurity. Maybe something in IT. Once, years ago, my mother told someone I helped build firewalls for schools. I never corrected her. I never correct any of them. Because, how do you explain that sometimes your job is the difference between a normal Tuesday and a cyber attack that shuts down half the East Coast? How do you explain the hours spent tracking ghost code through overseas proxies, or the quiet messages that come in code words, or the nights when you realize you're looking at something that shouldn't exist? You don't. You just smile and let them believe you do computer stuff. Later that evening, I was on the back porch alone, watching the wind move through the aspens. Everyone else was inside, talking about someone's promotion or someone's new car or Jill's newest court case. The sun was going down. The sky had that bruised purple glow that only seems to show up in Colorado. That's when the door creaked behind me. I turned slightly. A tall man in a pressed suit stepped outside, holding a glass of bourbon. I recognized him. Tom Bailey, Jill's boyfriend. She'd been dating him for about a year. I knew he was ex-military. Air Force, I think. I didn't know much else. We'd only ever exchanged polite nods and small talk at these things. He walked over slowly and stood next to me without speaking for a moment. "Hell of a sunset," he finally said. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's the only part of the day they can't ruin." He let out a quiet chuckle, then nodded. "You're Amber, right?" I nodded. He looked at me for a second. really looked. Not in that casual, scanning way people do at family gatherings. It was the kind of look that made you feel like he saw something more than your face. "You in federal work?" he asked, still casual. I didn't answer right away. "Something like that," I said. "Did 12 years in signals intel myself," he said, sipping. "I know the look." I didn't say anything, but the hairs on my arms rose slightly. "Your family doesn't know?" he asked. I shook my head. He looked down, then back up, nodding very slowly. "But you've been holding the line," he said quietly, like it was a fact he was sure of. Then he looked back out at the trees. We stood in silence until the wind shifted, and the sound of someone calling from inside pulled him away. I stayed on the porch a little longer, staring into the dusk. Something felt different, but I didn't know what yet. I didn't know what was coming. Not then. The dining room was already too warm when we all sat down. One of the overhead lights had burned out, but no one bothered replacing it. Shadows slid across the long table, cutting some faces in half while others glowed like they were on stage. The candles in the middle flickered, purely decorative. Nobody in my family believed in ambiance unless it was posted on Instagram. I took my usual seat, 3 from the end, next to the kids' table but not quite part of it. My mother always arranged the seating. Jill, of course, was at the center, framed like a centerpiece. Her voice rose above the rest, carrying confidence in that courtroom-trained way of hers. To her left sat Tom Bailey. He was polite, attentive, his laugh warm but never too loud. He held Jill's hand when she spoke. She made a point not to look at him when anyone else did. Power dynamics. My sister's favorite language. I noticed Tom's gaze drift toward me a few times during dinner. Not in an intrusive way, more like someone trying to solve a puzzle without the picture on the box. "Amber," Jill said suddenly, mid-conversation, "Tom wants to know what you really do for work." Forks paused. My stomach did too. Tom smiled faintly. "I think I have an idea already." I looked at him sharply. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, and I knew then he had served long enough to know the signs, the absences, the controlled reactions, the way I carried my silences like armor. "I'm in federal analysis," I said simply. Jill rolled her eyes. "See? Vague, right? That's how she keeps the mystery alive. Honestly, I think it's just freelance tech support. Am I wrong?" Laughter. Even from Cody, who'd once begged me to rewrite his entire investor deck at 2 a.m. and then forgot to thank me during his pitch. My mother chuckled behind her wine glass, her bracelet clinking against the stem. I smiled. Small? Controlled? Tom didn't laugh. He wiped his mouth, then pushed back his chair slightly. "I'd like to say something." The table quieted. That never happened. Not at these dinners. Not when Jill was mid-story. Not when wine was flowing. But something about his tone sliced through the noise. He stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. And then, he turned to face me. My heart stuttered. "Amber Reed," he said clearly, voice steady and full of gravity. "On behalf of those of us who've served, and those of us who understand the cost of silence, I want to thank you for your work." My throat tightened. Time stopped, and then, with absolute formality, he brought his hand to his brow and saluted me. The sound in the room collapsed. Even the wine glasses seemed to hold their breath. No one moved. No one laughed. The only sound was the tick of the antique wall clock, the one my mother insisted had belonged to her grandmother, but had actually come from a discount estate sale in Denver. My sister blinked. "Tom," she said, her voice too high, "what are you—" "She doesn't talk about it," Tom said calmly, eyes still on me. "But I know her type. I've worked beside them. They're the ones who show up before the headlines. The ones who never get thanked. the ones who save lives without anyone knowing a damn thing. He turned to the table now, slowly, letting his gaze pass over every person seated. You sit here and joke about what she does. You think because it doesn't come with a badge or a uniform or a courtroom drama, it isn't real. But some of us know the difference between noise and purpose. I couldn't breathe. Not really. Something cracked inside me, quietly, like frost breaking under sunlight. My mother stared, lips parted but silent. Jill looked like someone had just spoken a language she didn't understand. Cody had set his phone down. That, somehow, hit me hardest. Tom looked back at me. "Thank you, ma'am," he said again, softer this time, "for what you've done and what you still do." And then he sat down, like nothing had happened. I was still sitting very still. I hadn't moved. I couldn't move. I was too aware of my own heartbeat. Something changed in the room then. Not immediately, and not on the surface, but it was there. Like someone had turned the house a few degrees off center, and suddenly, nothing fit quite the way it used to. The rest of the dinner passed in halting conversation. No one made another joke at my expense. Jill's voice was quieter. My mother refilled my glass without asking. Cody just kept looking at me, like he was trying to remember all the times he hadn't. But I wasn't thinking about any of them. I was thinking about the moment Tom had stood and saluted me. Not because I needed the recognition, but because for the first time in my life, someone had spoken my language, without me saying a word. The days after the dinner passed without fanfare. No one brought it up. Not the salute. Not the silence. Not the moment that had sliced through the night like a scalpel. Instead, I received a polite thank you text from my mother. Not for the dinner help, not for showing up, just, "Thank you for coming. Hope the flight back was smooth." No mention of Tom's words. No mention of me at all, really. It might as well have been sent to a neighbor who dropped off a casserole. But I didn't reply. Something had shifted. Not in them. In me. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight to explain myself, or soften the air with jokes, or smooth the wrinkles in their view of me. I didn't rush to follow up. I didn't ask when the next gathering was, and most importantly, I didn't feel guilty for the silence that followed. Back in DC, the chill in the air was sharper, cleaner, the kind that wakes you up, not the kind that slips under your skin like a cold family smile. My apartment, a small unit in a quiet high-rise in Arlington, had never felt more like sanctuary. I kept the lights low, brewed dark coffee, and let the stillness speak. I returned to work on a Tuesday. There are things I still can't say about what I do. There are rooms I enter without a name badge, messages that vanish the second they're read, days that begin at 4 a.m. with no warning. But that week, something new happened. Someone in leadership pulled me aside after a closed briefing and asked if I'd ever considered mentoring. I almost said no, but then I thought of the girl I'd once been. The one who thought silence was strength, who thought invisibility was the price of purpose, and I said yes. That's how it began. I started meeting with new analysts, brilliant, jittery kids just out of grad school, still trying to untangle the difference between confidentiality and isolation. Some of them reminded me of myself, the ones who didn't speak unless asked, the ones who double-checked everything, who never wanted credit, who always looked a little over their shoulder. They weren't the loud ones, but they were the ones who would carry the weight when it mattered, and I wanted to make sure they didn't lose themselves the way I almost had. In the evenings, I walked home alone through quiet city streets. I stopped by the corner bodega where the old man behind the counter never asked questions, just handed over the same peppermint tea I'd been buying for years. I listened to records that no one else knew I loved. Jazz. Experimental folk. Those strange, moody pieces that sound like memory, and I stopped answering my family's messages. At first, they came often. Hey, can you look at this IRS thing for me? Do you still have that template you made for Dad's medical forms? Cody needs help with a passport thing, says you know the system. I read them. I didn't respond. Then the tone shifted. Are you okay? Haven't heard from you? Just checking in. Amber, it's not like you to be this distant. But it was like me. They just didn't know what that meant. I never blocked them. That would have been dramatic. And drama had always been their currency. No, I just went quiet. Like a light left off in a hallway no one walks down anymore. Weeks passed. Then months. I moved again. Nothing dramatic. Just a better building, a shorter walk, a place with a view of the river. I filled the new space with what I chose. No family photos, no reminders of what I'd tried to be for them. One evening, after a long debrief on a compromised intelligence thread, I got an unexpected call from Tom. I hadn't saved his number, but I recognized the voice immediately. I won't keep you, he said, tone as measured as ever. Just wanted to say, you made an impression. I didn't answer. There's something rare about someone who does their job that well and doesn't need anyone to see it. Still, I said nothing. Then he added, almost reluctantly, it shook Jill. The dinner, I mean. She hasn't admitted it, but I can tell. I let the silence stretch. She asked if you were mad. That made me laugh. A short, dry sound. Tell her, I said finally, that I'm not mad. I just stopped trying. Tom was quiet for a moment. Fair enough. We didn't talk long, but I remember feeling, after I hung up, like some invisible lock had quietly slid into place behind me. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge. It was just time to go. Not physically, I'd already done that, but emotionally, spiritually. I was no longer waiting at the door they never opened. That was the real leaving. No raised voices, no ultimatums, no final family group chat message. Just the sound of one life moving forward while the others sat in a house full of frames and trophies, wondering why it all felt emptier now. The email arrived on a Thursday. Subject line, Dad's birthday, everyone's coming, hope you can too. No greeting, no punctuation beyond what was necessary, no question mark. Even though it was a question, Jill had sent it. I could tell by the wording, by the lack of warmth disguised as formality. She was always careful, always in control, until she wasn't. I didn't open it at first. I just let it sit in the inbox like a dropped glass no one dared to clean up. I poured myself tea, stood by the window, and watched the lights across the river flicker on one by one like shy confessions. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. 3 days later, I responded with 6 words. I'll come, but only to observe. There was no reply. Not that I needed one. I arrived at the house just before sunset. Same porch. Same scent of overcooked beef and too much cinnamon. Same hum of overlapping conversations through the front door. And yet, everything was off. Not broken, just unsteady, like a house held together by breath. I didn't ring the doorbell. I walked in. No one greeted me, not because they didn't care, because they didn't know how. That was new. That was telling. My father sat in his old recliner in the corner, quieter than usual, as if his birthday had made him smaller somehow. Age had folded into his posture like a closing book. But when he saw me, his eyes cleared. Just for a second. Hey, kid, he said. It was the same thing he always said. But this time it wasn't casual. It was almost reverent. I nodded. In the dining room, voices dimmed when I passed by. People watched but didn't speak. Cody looked up from his phone, hesitated, then tucked it in his jacket. My mother stood behind the cake, knife in hand, frozen for a second too long. Jill stepped forward first. "Thanks for coming," she said. She didn't smile. That mattered. It meant she wasn't performing. "I'm not here for the performance," I replied. "Not cold? Just true." She nodded. "Look, I don't know if I ever really got it," she said. "What you do. What you've done." "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to know it mattered." And for the first time in our lives, Jill didn't try to win the moment. She just let it be. After dinner, people scattered to the porch, the living room, old photo albums no one had opened in years. My father and I stood in the hallway. He reached into the side drawer of the console table and pulled something out. A folded envelope. Yellowed slightly, handwritten in his blocky military-style script. "I found this a while ago," he said. "Meant to give it to you when you graduated." I took it silently. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "You do things quiet. I see it. Doesn't mean I always say it, but I see it. Maybe that's from me. If so, I'm sorry. You deserved louder." I folded the note back up carefully like a relic and slid it into my coat pocket. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Later that evening, before I left, my mother stopped me by the front door. Her lips moved like she was searching for the right shape, but no words came. I looked at her for a long moment. "Silence can say a lot," I said. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the cool Colorado night. The air smelled like something ending, or maybe something beginning. I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Back in DC, I returned to my quiet work, to the people who understood purpose without spectacle, to the young analysts I now mentored, ones who whispered thanks not because they were shy, but because they knew the value of things unsaid. And slowly, the messages from my family began again. Not as demands, not as assumptions, just fragments. "Thinking of you. I saw something that reminded me of you today. Do you remember when—" I didn't respond right away. Some I never responded to at all. But when I did, I chose when, and how, and what to say. Because that's what dignity is. Not silence. Not noise. Choice. Tom reached out again, too. Not often. Just enough. We never became anything more. But when we did talk, it always felt like something solid underfoot. Like standing on truth. One day, while speaking at a closed seminar, I ended with a story. I didn't name names. I didn't describe the dinner or the salute. I didn't need to. I just said, "Sometimes the most important acknowledgement you'll ever receive comes too late. And sometimes, just sometimes, it comes right on time, in a single word you never expected." I paused, looked out across the room of young, sharp minds and said, "Mem." And that was enough. That was everything.